Carioca is a Brazilian noun or adjective used to refer to anything related to the city of Rio de Janeiro, the capital of the homonymous state of Rio de Janeiro, in Brazil. The original word carioca comes from the indigenous Tupi language meaning white man's house. Quote, "It is said that the first Portuguese dwellings in Rio de Janeiro were placed along a limpid stream, which was soon adapted into Portuguese as carioca. The demonym meaning for the state of Rio de Janeiro is fluminense, taken from the Latin word flumen, meaning river. For instance, someone from Niterói is both fluminense and niteroiense, and someone from Rio de Janeiro is fluminense or carioca. Rio de Janeiro is an ethnically diverse city by the standards of the Western world's global cities. The last PNAD census numbers for Rio de Janeiro are 8,576,000 white, 5,376,000 pardo, 1,920,000 black and 128,000 Asian or indigenous. The last PNAD census for the city of Rio de Janeiro is 3,193,588 white, 2,244,997 pardo, 809,463 black and 75,887 Asian or indigenous. Like other Brazilians, cariocas speak Portuguese. The carioca accent and sociolect are the most famous of Brazil, in part because Rede Globo, the second largest television network in the world, is headquartered in Rio de Janeiro. Thus, a lot of Brazilian TV programs, from news and documentary to entertainment, feature carioca acting and speaking talent, accomplishments and influence. Carioca people have invented a few sports. The most famous is foot volley. Cariocas are credited with creating the bossa nova dance. Famous cariocas in film include Brazilian bombshell Carmen Miranda, a Portuguese woman who grew up in Rio de Janeiro. An eponymous song from 1933, Carioca has become a jazz standard. Sociolect. The Portuguese spoken across the states of Rio de Janeiro and Espírito Santo and neighboring towns in Minas Gerais and in the city of Florianópolis, has similar features, hardly different from one another. So cities such as Paraty, Resende, Campos dos Goitacazes, Cachoeiro de Itapemirim, Vila Velha and Linhares may be said to have the same dialect as Rio de Janeiro, as they are hardly perceived as strong regional variants by people from other parts of Brazil. The Brazilian Portuguese variant spoken in the city of Rio de Janeiro is called carioca, and it is called sotaque locally, literally translated as accent. It can be said that Rio de Janeiro presents a sociolect inside the major fluminense Capixaba dialect, as speakers inside the city may be easily recognizable more by the slang than the way the phonology of the speech, which is closer to the standard Brazilian Portuguese in the media than other variants. It is known especially for several distinctive traits new to either variant of the Portuguese language. Coda per second and Z can be pronounced as palato alveolo, and of English are the alveolo palatal, and of Catalan, that is inherited from European Portuguese, and carioca shares it only with Florianopolitano and some other fluminense accents. In the northern tones of Brazilian Portuguese, not all coda per second and Z become post-alveolar. As well, what would be coda R in European Portuguese may be realized as various voiceless and voiced guttural-like sounds. Most often the latter, many or most of them, can be part of the phonetic repertory of a single speaker, among them the velar and uvular fricative pairs, as well both glottal transitions, the voiceless pharyngeal fricative and the uvular trill. and the diversity of allophones of a single rhotic phoneme is rare not just in Brazilian Portuguese but also among most world languages. Originally probably from Tupi influence, through the Portuguese post-Creole that appeared in southeastern Brazil after the ban of Língua Geral Paulista as a marker of Jesuit activity by the Marquis of Pombal, the consonants t and d before I, or final unstressed tilde e, become affricates and, respectively. That is now commonplace in Brazilian Portuguese, as it spread with the bandeiras paulistas. Expansion of Mineiros to the center-west and mass media. It is not as universal in São Paulo, Espírito Santo and southern Brazil, even though they were populated mostly by the original bandeirantes, because the European immigrants learning Portuguese and the descendants preferred more conservative registers of the language, perhaps as a mark of a separate social identity. Historical, which merged with coda R in Caipira, has undergone labialization to, and then vocalized to, nevertheless, with the exception of B, the one used in southern Brazil and São Paulo instead of, both commonly transcribed as. The process is now nearly ubiquitous in Brazilian Portuguese, so only some areas retain velarized lateral alveolar, approximant of the retroflex approximant as coda L. The traits, as a whole and consistent among the vast majority of speakers, were ones specifically characteristic of Rio de Janeiro speech and distinguished particularly from the pronunciation of São Paulo in areas further south, which formerly had adapted none of the characteristics. The chiado of the coda sibilant is thought to date from the early 1800s occupation of the city by the Portuguese royal family, as European Portuguese had a similar characteristic for the post-alveolar codas. More recently, however, all of the traits have spread throughout much of the country by the cultural influence of the city that diminished the social marker character the lack of palatalization once had. Affrication is today widespread, if not nearly omnipresent among young Brazilians, and coda guttural R is also found nationwide but less among speakers in the 5 southernmost states other than Rio de Janeiro, and if accent is a good social indicator, 95 to 105 million Brazilians consistently palatalize coda sibilant in some instances. Another common characteristic of Carioca speech is, in a stressed final syllable, the addition of j before coda per second. The change may have originated in the Northeast, where pronunciations such as Jesus have long been heard. Also, immigration from northeastern Brazil and Spanish immigration causes debuccalization of the coda sibilant mesmo. Many Brazilians assume that is specific to Rio, but in the Northeast, debuccalization has long been a strong and advanced phonological process that may also affect onset sibilants per second and z, as well as other consonants. Primarily, there are some grammatical characteristics of this sociolect as well. An important one is the mixing of second-person pronouns voce and tu, even in the same speech. For instance, while normative Portuguese requires lhe as the oblique for voce and te as oblique for tu, in Carioca slang, the once formal voce is used for all cases. In informal speech, the pronoun tu is retained, but with the verb forms belonging to the form voce, tu foin a festa. So the verbal forms are the same for both voce and tu. Many Cariocas and many Paulistas shorten voce and use ce instead. Ce vai pra casaragra. That, however, is common only on the spoken language and is rarely written. Slang words among youngsters from Rio de Janeiro include caraca, and quale, quae, and montero and sinistro. Many of these slang words can be found in practically all of Brazil by cultural influence from the city. Much slang from Rio de Janeiro spreads across Brazil and may be not known as originally from there, and those less culturally accepted elsewhere are sometimes used to shun not only the speech of a certain subculture, age group or social class but also the whole accent. Bibliography. Vital. Leader. Introdução a Estudos de Fonologia de Português Brasileiro. Editora EDIPUCRS Porto Alegre, Rio Grande do Sul. ISBN 85-7430-529-4.